"We haven't eaten in 5 days," the widow whispered. The rancher handed her bread and his last name. Texas Panhandle, March 1868. A storm had passed through the plains the night before, soaking the land in relentless rain. Now the sun returned, glaring down on a stretch of mud and broken grass between two nameless towns. The road was little more than churned clay, wheel ruts fading into puddles. The air still smelled of thunder. Under a makeshift tarp pinned between a broken wagon and a bent tree limb, Grace Holloway crouched low, arms wrapped around her 5-year-old daughter. Hazel's cheeks were hollow, her lips dry, her small body rattled by a cough that echoed like a snapped twig. Grace pressed her hand to the girl's back, trying to steady her breathing, but her own fingers trembled. She had lost count of the days, but her stomach had not. The last cracker was 3 days ago. The rain had soaked their firewood, the wind had taken their blankets. Missouri was behind them, but what lay ahead was no clearer. "Schnow," Grace whispered, brushing a damp curl from Hazel's forehead. "Mama's right here." Hazel gave no answer, only another dry, sharp cough. Then, through the flap of the tarp, Grace heard hooves, steady, slow, pulling through the mud. She froze, pulling Hazel close, heart pounding. Drifter? Bounty hunter? Worse? The tarp shifted. A figure on horseback appeared through the tree line, a broad-shouldered man driving cattle along the trail. He wore a soaked, wide-brimmed hat, mud-spattered coat, and boots sunk deep in the muck. When he saw the wagon, he reined in gently. He dismounted and tied off the reins to a low branch. As he approached, Grace pulled Hazel behind her, one hand wrapping around the broken handle of a cooking pot. The man raised one hand. "Easy now, just me." He stepped closer, squinting through the mist of breath between them. His face was weathered, not unkind. A short beard, brown eyes, and a pale scar beneath one cheekbone. "Ma'am," he said, "you need help?" Grace opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her throat was too dry, her body too cold. She tried again, barely audible. We haven't eaten in 5 days." The cowboy stood still for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, half a loaf of old bread, crust hard and cracked. He knelt and held it out with both hands. "It ain't fresh," he said, "but it's real." Grace stared at it, wide-eyed, then took it in both hands like it was gold. She broke a piece off and gave it to Hazel first. The girl took it with shaking fingers and began to chew, tears filling her eyes. The man stood back, watching. "My name is Royce Banner," he said. "I have a small spread 5 miles west. Not much, but there is a dry roof, warm stove, and a barn that don't leak." Grace looked up, lips parted. A stranger offering help in a world that had given her so little. Royce met her gaze, calm and patient. "I can help dig the wagon out later," he added. "But right now, you and your little one need rest." Grace looked down at Hazel, now curled beside her, chewing slowly, then back at the man. I do not know your name," she said. "I told you," he said. "Royce Banner. And I reckon you don't need to know more than that, unless you want to." He extended his hand. "There's a place for you at my ranch, if you believe it." Grace stared at his hand, then slowly reached out her own, thin and shaking. "I believe," she whispered. Royce gave a small nod, his grip steady. "Then let us go home." The storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy with low, trailing clouds. Royce's ranch stood at the end of a long, muddy trail, nestled against a rise of cottonwoods that swayed gently in the wind. It was not grand, just a squat, 2-room cabin built from thick-cut logs, its chimney puffing faint smoke into the cool dusk. A barn sat 50 paces off, and a small corral held a few tired-looking horses and calves. Royce led the wagon to the side of the cabin and helped Grace and Hazel down carefully. The little girl clung to her mother, her fingers digging into the back of Grace's worn dress. "There is firewood stacked by the door," Royce said simply. "The stove is hot. Go on in. I'll see to the mule." Grace hesitated, eyes scanning the land, the trees, the wide, empty sky. Her grip on Hazel tightened. Then, slowly, she stepped onto the porch and pushed open the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of ash, iron, and something faintly sweet. Apples, maybe, long dried. A cast-iron stove warmed the center, and a single oil lamp cast soft shadows across the wooden walls. There was a narrow bed against the far wall, a rough table, and 2 chairs. Nothing else. No decorations, no clutter. Grace stood in the doorway, unsure, until Royce came in behind her, brushing off his coat. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight." "That is not necessary," she replied quickly, her voice tight. He set his hat on the table and shrugged. "It is not about necessary. It is about comfort. I figure you need it more." Grace nodded, her eyes avoiding his. She led Hazel to the bed but laid out her own shawl on the floor beside it. She made a small pillow from her rolled-up coat, then pulled the child close to her. Royce watched from the corner for a beat, then crossed to the cabinet and pulled out 2 thick quilts. "I lost my father when I was 10, he said quietly, placing the quilts near her. "Winter took him before spring had a chance. I remember the cold, not just from the wind, but in here." He touched his chest once, then turned away. Grace did not answer, but she drew the quilts over Hazel, tucking her in gently. Later that night, Royce sat at the edge of the porch, sharpening a dull knife by the light of the moon. He could hear Hazel's coughing through the cabin walls. It was dry and tired, like her voice, the kind of cough that made a man feel helpless. He stood, walked to the barn, and returned with an old shirt of his from a trunk. He sat at the table with a piece of thread and a coarse needle, stripped from a horse's tail, and began to stitch by firelight. It was clumsy work. His fingers were built for rope, not cloth. He pricked himself twice. The seam was crooked, and the stitches uneven. But when he was done, the small tear in Hazel's sleeve was closed. The next morning, Grace found the mended shirt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. She touched it gently, running her fingers along the awkward stitching. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. When Royce came in from feeding the stock, she was standing by the stove, a cup of warm water in her hands. "Thank you," she said softly. He just nodded, setting down a pail of eggs. It needed doing. She watched him for a long moment, something soft flickering behind her eyes. Then, for the first time since they met, she smiled. Small, faint, but real. Royce caught it out of the corner of his eye, then turned away to stoke the fire. Grace said nothing about her past, not yet, not about Missouri, not about what chased her across state lines. But that night, when Hazel curled against her and fell asleep without a cough, Grace looked at the ceiling beams and whispered to no one, "Maybe we can rest, just for a little while." The days stretched longer with each sunrise. Winter retreated, and spring whispered through the air. Mornings still held a bite, but by midday, the porch boards warmed under sunlight, and the horses moved with quiet energy. Royce began taking Hazel to the barn after breakfast. At first, she clung to Grace's skirt, intimidated by the towering animals and their restless snorts. But Royce was patient. He crouched beside her with oats in his hand. "Let him come to you," he said gently. "Just hold your hand steady." Hazel looked to her mother for reassurance. "It is all right, sweet pea," Grace said softly. "You can try." Hazel hesitated, then stretched out her hand. The chestnut mare sniffed her fingers and gently lipped the oats from her palm. Hazel giggled, wide-eyed. Royce smiled faintly. "Braver than most grown men I know." From then on, Hazel followed him each morning, scattering feed, brushing ponies. Royce showed her how to move slowly, to stroke a horse's neck flat-handed, to speak in low tones. Grace often watched from the porch. Hazel's laughter, so rare since Missouri, returned in pieces. Inside, Grace began to settle in. She cooked meals from what little they had: beans, flour, canned peaches. She kept the cabin clean, washed clothes, and hung them to dry by the barn. One afternoon, She found a box under the bed filled with Royce's ledgers, smudged numbers, unbalanced entries. "I used to keep books for a freight office," she said. "If you do not mind, I could help clean these up." Royce looked at her, surprised. "You did figures?" She nodded, flipping through the pages. "My husband was not good with numbers." After a moment, Royce handed her a pencil. When he returned later, the pages were neat, tallied, and orderly. A note in the margin read, "Your tobacco supplier overcharged you last month." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Remind me not to cross you in business." Grace looked up, pride and something heavier behind her eyes. A woman who had known comfort and lost it. Royce saw it. They did not speak of it. That same week, Hazel wandered too close to the gray stallion, ill-tempered and unbroken. She held a bucket, mimicking Royce's chores. "Careful, Hazel," Grace called, but too late. The stallion snorted, reared, and kicked. "Move!" Royce shouted, throwing himself between them. The hoof struck his shoulder and sent him sprawling. He hit the dirt hard, arm limp. Hazel screamed. Grace ran. By the time she reached them, Royce was upright, cradling his arm, dust clinging to his shirt. "Are you hurt?" Grace asked, breath shaky. He winced. "Not too bad. He missed the good part." Grace helped him to the cabin, sat him near the stove, and peeled back his shirt. A bruise was already blooming, deep and dark. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "She is just a little girl." She dipped a cloth in warm water and cleaned the wound with care. Her hands were gentle, but her breath caught in her throat. "You could have been killed." Royce met her eyes. So could she. They sat in silence, the fire cracking beside them. Her hand paused on his skin, then moved again, slower now. She lifted her eyes to his. Neither looked away. The air between them felt like a held breath. Grace spoke first, a whisper. "Thank you." Royce nodded once. "Any time." That night, Hazel slept curled against her mother, safe and still. Grace lingered by the fire longer than usual, eyes drifting now and then to the closed door behind which Royce rested, his arm bruised, his heart steady. Hazel sat cross-legged on the porch, her dolls lined up before her on an old feed sack. She moved them around with solemn purpose, mumbling softly in play, unaware that Royce was just around the corner fixing a broken hinge. "Now you be quiet," she told one of the dolls, scolding in a whisper. "If you say Reuben's name again, he'll come find us." Royce's hands paused mid-motion. Hazel went on, her voice thinner now. "Mama said not to talk about the bad uncle, but he is mean. He hit Mama and broke the door. I saw." The wrench slipped from Royce's grip and clattered against the wood. Hazel startled and looked up, eyes wide. Royce stepped onto the porch slowly, kneeling beside her. "Hazel," he said gently, "what did you say about Reuben?" The girl froze, then turned her face away. "Nothing." Royce looked toward the door, where Grace had just stepped out with a bowl of laundry. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, something shifted. She set the bowl down and walked over, crouching beside her daughter. "Go inside, Hazel. Wash your hands for supper." Hazel glanced between them, then scurried through the door. Grace stayed still for a breath, her jaw tight. "So," Royce said quietly, "Reuben is not just a name from Missouri, is he?" Grace sat back on her heels, her shoulders low with exhaustion. "No," she admitted, "he is not." Royce waited, not pressing. "My husband Matthew died 2 years ago. Hunting accident, shot clean through by his own partner. Or so they said." She looked off toward the horizon, eyes dark. "Matthew's father left the land to Hazel. Not to me, not even to Matthew's brother. Just Hazel." She swallowed hard. When Matthew died, Reuben saw an opportunity. He tried to claim guardianship, said I was unstable, that I was unfit. Royce's eyes narrowed. "And he had proof?" Grace laughed, sharp and bitter. "Proof? No, just influence. He drank with the sheriff, went to church every Sunday, wore clean boots." Royce said nothing. Grace's voice lowered. "One night, I woke up and found him standing in Hazel's room. He said he came to check on her. I told him to leave. He didn't." Her fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt. "I locked Hazel in the pantry and threatened him with a fire poker. He laughed, said nobody would believe me, that the land was his by right. I waited until he passed out drunk and we ran. Took only what I could carry." She looked at Royce then, her eyes not asking for pity, just the space to breathe. "I had no plan. Just get as far away from Missouri as the road would carry us." Royce nodded slowly. He did not ask more, did not offer words of comfort or justice. That night, after Hazel was asleep and the fire had gone low, he opened the old trunk beneath his bed. Inside lay a revolver wrapped in oilcloth, untouched since the war. He sat at the table, lit a lantern, and cleaned it in silence. Then he loaded 6 bullets, one by one, and set it beneath his coat. No words passed between him and Grace as she passed behind him to fetch water. But she paused at the doorway. "I did not expect kindness out here," she said softly. "Not after what we ran from." Royce kept his eyes on the lantern's flame. "You do not owe me anything," he replied. She hesitated, then said, "No, but I want to earn what you've given." He looked up at her, the light catching the edge of a quiet understanding between them. Outside, the wind picked up again, but inside, the cabin felt steadier than it had in days. The days grew longer still, and the wind softened. In the mornings, the dew clung to the grass like pearls, and by noon, the sun baked the earth into something solid enough to walk without sinking. Royce spent most daylight hours fixing the broken axle on Grace's wagon. He worked slow, careful, like a man not just rebuilding wood and iron, but weighing something heavier in his chest. One afternoon, as he wiped sweat from his brow, Grace came out with a tin cup of cool water. She handed it to him without a word and sat down on the porch steps. For a moment, they both watched Hazel chase butterflies around the edge of the barn, her laugh light and free. Royce drank, then set the cup down beside him. "You know," he said, "I am not trying to keep you here." Grace turned to him, eyes shaded under her bonnet. "I never thought you were." He nodded. "Still, if you need to leave, I will help you get wherever you are going. But if you need a place to get steady again, this land is firm. Might not be rich, might not be fancy, but it will hold your feet." Grace looked away for a moment, her throat working around emotion she did not know how to name. "I never had a man offer me ground," she said. "Only reasons to run." Royce did not reply, but something quiet passed between them, rooted and slow-growing. After that, Grace changed. She still rose early, still swept and boiled water and mended her own dresses, but now she hummed while washing Hazel's hair. She started braiding wildflowers and putting them in jars on the kitchen table. Her smiles came easier, and sometimes she laughed, soft and sudden, like she had forgotten how. Royce noticed, and though he never spoke it aloud, he responded in kind. One evening, after finishing repairs on the barn door, he disappeared for an hour. Grace thought nothing of it, but the next morning, when Hazel stepped onto the porch, she gasped. A small swing hung from the wooden beam, crafted from worn oak and thick rope. It was just the right size for her. She touched it with reverence, then looked back at her mother with wide, shining eyes. "Did Mama make this?" she asked. Grace shook her head. "No, sweet pea. That was Mr. Royce." Hazel ran to the swing and climbed in, kicking her feet with delight. From inside the barn, Royce watched without stepping forward. But he heard the laughter, and he let himself smile. That night, supper was simple. Beans, cornbread, a jar of blackberry preserves Grace had bartered for with a neighbor. They sat quietly at the table, Hazel nestled in Royce's old coat beside the fire, dozing. Grace sipped from her tin cup and glanced at him. "You do not talk much," she said. "I talk when needed." She smiled faintly. "Then let me do the talking." He tilted his head. "All right." She took a breath. "If I were braver, I would tell you that this place feels more like home than anywhere I have been." He looked at her, steady. You do not need to be brave to say that. No, she whispered. No. They lapsed into silence, and the fire snapped and hissed between them. From the bedroll, Hazel stirred. In a sleepy, slurred whisper, she mumbled, "Night, Papa." Grace froze. Royce looked up. The word hung in the air like a prayer spoken too soon. Hazel did not wake. She rolled over and tucked her hand beneath her cheek, breathing deep. Grace's eyes met Royce's across the dim room. Neither spoke, neither dared. But they did not look away. There was no correction, no apology, no explanation. Only a look, long and quiet, that carried something like a promise, unnamed but undeniable. Outside, the swing creaked gently in the wind. Dust spiraled down the trail like smoke rising from the earth. Royce had just finished splitting logs when he saw the lone rider cutting across the horizon, heading straight for the ranch with purpose in his posture. The man rode a sleek black gelding, fast and lean, and wore a long gray coat that shimmered with travel dust. By the time he reached the fence line, Grace was already standing on the porch, Hazel behind her skirts, clutching tightly. Her face had gone pale. The blood drained from her cheeks as she stared at the man approaching. "Reuben," she breathed. Royce stepped out of the barn, axe still in hand. The rider dismounted with a practiced swing and tied off his reins to the post. He walked with the ease of someone used to getting what he wanted, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and smirking like he already owned the place. Pinned to his chest was a silver badge, court-appointed custodian of estate and minor ward. "Well now," Reuben drawled, "quite the little homestead you've made for yourself, sister-in-law. And here I was, worried you and the girl had died in some ditch." Grace did not answer, her jaw locked tight. Reuben turned toward Royce. "Name's Reuben Holloway. I am here for the girl." Royce narrowed his eyes. "Your what?" "She's my legal responsibility," Reuben said, patting the badge like it was holy scripture. "Her father's estate, what's left of it, belongs to her, which means I get her, and anything she inherits. Including you," he added, glancing at Grace with a sneer. Royce stepped slowly onto the porch, placing himself between Reuben and the door. "You will not be taking anything from here," he said evenly. Reuben scoffed. "You planning to stop me?" Grace stepped forward. "You have no right." Reuben cut her off. "No right? I have the damn court on my side, woman. You kidnapped a minor and fled the state. I could have you locked up in Amarillo before sundown." Hazel whimpered behind Grace's dress. Royce set the axe down on the porch railing with deliberate slowness. "I am going to ask you once," he said, voice hard and flat. "Turn your horse around. Get off my land." Reuben's eyes glittered. "Or what? Cowboy?" Royce took a step closer. The porch boards creaked beneath his boots. "Or I forget you were ever here." Tension cracked between them like lightning. Reuben reached back, hand brushing the butt of his holstered revolver. Before he could draw, 3 more riders came over the rise. Neighbors Royce had helped through winter, ranchers from down the valley. One of them, old Elijah Tinsley, called out, "Banner, that man giving you trouble?" Reuben's eyes darted to the newcomers. He hesitated. Royce never looked away. "Hazel and her mother are under my roof. My name is Royce Banner. We were married last week in front of 2 witnesses and a traveling pastor. You got a badge? I got a wife and daughter." Reuben's hand froze. The other ranchers rode in closer now, silent but watchful. One of them unfastened his rifle from the saddle. Reuben licked his lips. "There is no certificate." "There is my word," Royce said, "and in these parts, that counts more." The silence held. Then Reuben spat into the dirt. "This ain't over," he hissed. "I will be back, with the law. Paper, ink, and iron." He turned, mounted his horse in one swift motion, and galloped off in a storm of dust. The ranchers lingered for a moment, then tipped their hats toward Grace. "We will ride by again," Elijah said. "Keep eyes open." Royce nodded. When the others left, Grace leaned against the doorframe, her breathing shaky. You said we were married, she murmured. Royce looked at her, calm as ever. That is the only thing I did not lie about. The evening after Reuben's visit hung heavy with dust and silence. Royce sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, the motion slow, thoughtful. Grace leaned against the doorway, arms folded across her chest, watching him in the dim orange light. I do not make a habit of lying, he said after a long pause, the scrape of steel against stone steady. But that day, when I said we were married, it felt more right than wrong. Grace stepped forward, her voice low. The first time I heard Hazel call you Papa, I was afraid. Not for her. For me. Royce looked up. I thought letting her love someone new would tear her apart if it ended, she continued. But now, I cannot picture our lives without you. He said nothing, but he set the knife aside and stood. There was no proposal, no question, only a simple truth between them. The next morning, Royce hitched the wagon and drove Grace and Hazel into town. The chapel was small, wooden, old, with only 6 pews and a cross carved by hand. The pastor, a quiet man with cloudy eyes, smiled kindly when they entered. 3 townsfolk joined them: Elijah Tinsley, Miss Marla from the general store, and young Thomas Gentry, who once traded Royce a lame calf for lumber. Grace wore a clean dress, faded blue. Hazel held her hand tight, hair tied back with a strip of linen. Royce stood straight beside her, a man of few words and steady hands. When the pastor asked if he took this woman, Royce answered with clarity, I already do. When the question turned to Grace, she looked up at him and said softly, I do, with all I have left. The vows were spoken, the Bible closed. There were no rings, just a shared look and hands held tightly. After the ceremony, Royce crouched beside Hazel outside the chapel. The little girl looked up at him, blinking in the sunlight. I know I ain't your blood, he said, but from this day on, I aim to be more than that. He gently touched her cheek. If it is all right with you, I will call you daughter. Hazel nodded slowly, then threw her arms around his neck. Royce held her close, his eyes shut tight. That night, back at the cabin, Grace put Hazel to bed, while Royce sat at the table. The firelight flickered over his face as he pulled out paper, dipped a quill into ink, and began to write. He wrote carefully, slowly, pressing each word down with quiet intention. To the Honorable Clerk of the Court, this letter serves as sworn testimony that Grace Holloway, now Grace Banner, and her daughter Hazel reside lawfully under my roof and protection. As of April 12, 1868, Grace and I are married by witness and church. I claim full guardianship of Hazel Banner as her legal father by marriage and intent, and stand ready to defend her rights and safety by all means afforded to a citizen of this county. He signed it in firm script, Royce T. Banner. Then he folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it beside his rifle on the table. He did not join Grace in bed that night. He sat by the fire, watching it burn low, keeping vigil, not over fear, but over a promise made. Not with passion, with purpose. The sun rose earlier now, and the wind carried warmth instead of warnings. Green pushed through the soil like a promise kept. The rain had softened the earth enough for Royce to plant early wheat, and for the first time in years, the fields no longer looked abandoned. A letter came mid-morning, delivered by Elijah Tinsley's boy. Royce read it on the porch, face unreadable, breath slow. The court had dismissed Reuben Holloway's claim. No legal grounds, no more questions. Royce Banner was now the legal guardian of Hazel Banner, no contest. He handed the letter to Grace without a word. She read it twice, then pressed her fingers to her lips, tears shining in her eyes. Hazel came running from the barn, waving a stick with a ribbon tied to the top. What is it? She asked, looking from Royce to Grace. Grace crouched beside her and took her hands gently. It means, she whispered, we are staying. No more running. Hazel turned to Royce. Really? He knelt down, brushing a hand over her hair. Really? Hazel's face lit up. Does that mean I get to keep learning my letters? He chuckled. We will make a reader out of you yet." Hazel's reading lessons became a daily rhythm. Grace guided her through the alphabet each morning, and in the afternoons, Royce sat beside her on the porch, pointing at carved letters on wood scraps. One morning, as Grace handed her a new reader, Hazel looked up and said, "You smile more now, Mama." Grace blinked. "Do I?" Hazel nodded. "You are the mama that smiles. That is what I tell the chickens." Grace laughed, full and real. That night, after chores were done, Royce sat on the porch carving. He worked quietly into dusk, sawdust clinging to his sleeves. The next morning, Grace stepped outside and saw what he had hung over the gate. "Banner and family." No other words, no decoration, just truth. She stood there a long time, hand pressed to her chest. The harvest dinner came a few days later, simple but full. Beans, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and cornbread, Grace made from scratch. Hazel helped set the table with pride, folding napkins, placing a bouquet of wildflowers in a jar. They sat together at the table Royce's father had built long ago. 3 people once broken, now somehow whole. Firelight flickered. Hazel bowed her head and said grace in her soft, sincere voice. Then she dug into her cornbread, grinning. As Royce passed a slice of bread to Grace, their hands brushed. She looked at him, then glanced around the cabin, the warm stove, the solid walls, her daughter humming to herself with a full belly. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. "You know," she said, "our first meal together was dry bread under a broken wagon." Royce nodded. "I remember." Grace smiled. "Tonight we have food, a roof, and a name." She looked at him, eyes bright. "That day you gave me bread. Today you gave me something better." He reached for her hand, fingers lacing through hers. "I gave you what was already yours," he said quietly. Her smile deepened, no longer uncertain. "Then I suppose it is mine to keep." The fire crackled. Outside, the wheat rustled in the evening breeze, and under the new sign on the gate, the porch light burned, soft, steady, and home. If this story moved your heart, even just a little, if it reminded you that love can rise from dust, danger, and the edge of despair, then you belong right here with us. Hit that like button to let us know you felt it. Tap subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the heart of the American frontier. At Wild West Love Stories, every story is carved from longing, loyalty, and the kind of love that defies the rules. So stay with us. There is more heartbreak, more healing, and more unforgettable romance waiting just around the bend. Where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Welcome home, partner.